So remember that chart I showed you, we're losing 1 to 2 watts per meter squared. This is horizontal irradiation, or another radiation map on how much radiation is striking these crop growing zones in South America and South Africa here, for example. Your bars right there are showing you the daily totals of how much watts per meter squared is striking the planet's surface there. If we're going to remove one out of that, every color on this map goes dimmer in both continents, on all the continents. You take down the solar irradiance, they all step into a different band. And welcome back to Brighteon TV Uncensored. David Dubine here, Adapt 2030. As we look at the world right now, it literally makes no sense if you look at it from a logical perspective. But if you look at it from something that is so civilization ending that the bankruptcy proceedings of the world happening in tandem across all continents makes perfect sense. Now, as of a couple months ago, when I started talking about the Tonga eruption and how much ash and water vapor and sulfur dioxide that injected into the atmosphere, at that point, there was a lot of data that was hidden. They stopped putting out data from, say, May, the beginning of May. So it was really hard to see where the aerosols were going and how much sunlight was being restricted from hitting the fields out in South America or Australia. I'm going to bring to you today a lot more of that data, and it will make sense. The narratives, the bigger this global awareness becomes of the crop shortages, of the inbound famine, the more scattered energy interference wave needs to come out. Like harnessing 6 billion people through fear is putting up a very large scattering interference wave with those that are like myself. I'm just focused on getting ready now on my farm. So where does this bring us, though? It's starting to make the mainstream news, and I was saying it was going to divest into one or the other. They were going to try to hold it and hide it out, use it as the fear play eventually, but keep trucking along until that fear card came out. And again, it's already out this week. So as we look back through Mount Pinatubo, I want to kind of frame it in reference here. For those of you who watched the video 2 months ago, please, I got a whole bunch of new information in addition to. It's just an addendum and continuation of. So we want to compare Mount Pinatubo again, 1991. This is a pretty vast eruption. Cooled global temperatures about 0.7 of a degree Celsius, and there was some, diminished crop yields that year. It wasn't the best for crops around the planet. But when we look how high the ash cloud went up, and this was just strictly sulfur dioxide and ash, no water vapor. And we're talking about maybe 20 miles, 22 miles maximum. I'll even be generous and say 25 miles. And then the small visualization of the globe, what happened 2 to 3 years after. That's the bottom right where you see everything that's green and uniform. But what happened to the 2 to 3 months to 1 year after? This is where we sit right now, 1 year after the Tonga eruption, almost. Still got 2 more months. And it's still going to continue to cool in the Southern Hemisphere. November reminds us to be thankful and focused on boosting our radiant health before winter. I use a potent remedy that's improved the quality of my life and deepened my sleep as well. I take C60 EVO olive oil almost every morning, have a lot more energy and mental focus all day long. Working around the farm is easier and I have a lot more endurance. Remember, health is our greatest wealth, and pure C60 ESS60 really works. ESS60 is a breakthrough technology delivering the carbon-60 miracle molecule for humans and pets. Don't forget your furry friends, and check out the C60 EVO holiday gift collections for everyone on your list.
C60 EVO's lab has an impressive track record of 31 years and my personal recommendation. You deserve the best remedies on earth, and so do the ones you love. Buy direct from the lab and upgrade your life today. Take 10% off your first order by going to c60evo.com/adapt2030 or click on that link in the description box below. And now on with the video.
So now you compare that Pinatubo eruption with what we just saw jump out of the ocean and push an enormous amount of water vapor. The vapor cloud actually came out and clouded out one of the weather balloons that was over it. That's how high up it went. 100 and some thousand feet plus. So when you're going to compare an apple to an apple, we are talking about volcanic aerosols dimming sunlight and reducing crop output. That's purely what we're measuring up today. So this is where the rubber meets the road on this. I was saying that it is going to at some point come out as a fear weapon to drive the panic button on the global populace to get you to divide even further. This is the ultimate ingredient into the fear mix that is going to reset civilization and allow this great reset to continue forward unless we say no to it. This is an integral part here. So Daily Mail, in terms of believability, Daily Mail, they have a lot of outlandish, a lot of outlier types of stories. But as I'm going to look through next week here, Daily Mail was picking it up first, throwing it out, that this was the highest ever plume of water vapor ejected into the atmosphere ever. And lo and behold, like 50 other news networks picked this up right away, from CNN to BBC and everybody in between. It is out there globally now that this eruption is the highest water vapor eruption ever recorded. Now, that's a different constituent. Please remember, volcanic ash and sulfur dioxide is different from water vapor. So if we're looking at just one variable, it's the highest ever recorded, supposedly in human history, but nobody had satellite measurements back in the 1800s. So I mean, really, how far back can we go? Data set, 1979. Okay, I'll play. But off Himwari and GO 17, they showed the max height ash cloud at 87 kilometers, and my conversion at the bottom, 85 kilometers is 52 miles. So well above doubling of what was the sulfur dioxide and the ash emissions from Pinatubo, and you need to add in a third element, this time the water vapor. So now we have a completely different cocktail in the atmosphere in the Southern Hemisphere. Okay, we have the most modern satellites, oodles of garbage swirling around the planet in low Earth orbit, and we only got like under 10 photos of the entire event. Here on the left it begins, mid-eruption, and then what's interesting, it has sort of that sacred geometry look to it with the flower, the petals coming out. Before then, they'd collapse in on themselves. So what does that mean for you and I? The most modern instrumentation with the International Space Station going directly over this area every 1.5 hours for days, weeks, and months after the eruption. And these were the only images we got. You know why? Because these were the first images the day after the eruption. And they're like, whoa, that's a huge amount of ash. We might have a problem globally. If we show everybody, it's going to be too early to play the fear card. People could have figured it out. Like, there's an enormous amount of ash. Look how much is up here. This is after the first day. So covering a part of the planet after day one, that's going to create a problem. But you notice how quickly this was just completely forgotten and memory hold down the media. It was there 2 days, 3 days. Everybody's like, wow, it was a big one. Little tsunami, vibration waves rippling around the planet 3 times, and then it disappeared out of the news. We should have had thousands of photos, but we only got a handful, 5 or 6. Ask yourself why. Now remember, the eruption zone and the trade winds are blowing it toward Australia, and then it's getting into the cloud cells, which you see on either side of the planet, which then loop that ash and water vapor further down into the Antarctic areas. But this ash ejected and water vapor was so high above, it was into the upper mesosphere going up toward the ionosphere. So this is way over any kind of cloud layer boundaries or anything. This is for sure well over the equator now, which when we come into planting season next year, we're going to have a year without a summer also here. We'll come back into that in just a moment. I'll show you how it works. Here's some new data for you. Notice that it ends March 1st. January 15th eruption, and the data ends March 1st. So what you're looking at the top is everything combined that they had measured coming out of this eruptive event. Look how far it had spread off of the 20-degree south latitude band just a month and a half after the eruption. You could see clearly the spread. And if you're looking at just sulfur dioxide and water in the chart at the very bottom, very condensed. Adding all three ingredients together, we get the spread. And you'll start to see that that's creeping way down toward 40 south and then 50 south. If that was only a month and a half after, where has this ash gone to, is the question. NIWA quit publishing their data in May. So we got the March sort of update if you're looking through peer-reviewed research, which not a lot of people do. And then come up in May, the data stops completely on a dime. You cannot find, if you have any links to data showing optic aerosol depths, please send it to me. Because I searched through PDF search engines, PowerPoint search engines, anything that had to do with aerosol depths on peer-reviewed research from Linkspringer and Nature and all those different ones that host papers. And the latter data that you can find is in to the end of May, maybe the first week of June, and then it stops. Again, this is memory hold, very tightly controlled information. But why? We should all know that there's something tremendous happening. So then I don't get discouraged easily, and I do dig deep into the data. So I knew Null School had a bunch of particulate matter maps, so you can compare before and after. So PM10 is really where we're looking at this. You could go PM 2.5, that's the stuff that, is on the ground coming out of engines that people breathe and cause lung damage and all these kind of things. Parts per million 10 here, or micrometers of 10. Any particulate matter in the air, I'm going to read the definition to you, with a diameter of 10 microns or less, including dust, smoke, soot, salt, acids, metal, and ash. That's what we're looking at on the map here. So if you look at the bottom global view in 2018, the southern oceans are pretty clear. What's happening in the above map in 2022? And these were taken at the middle of October of this year, so about a month or so prior. It hasn't really changed much even in November. It's the same amount of ash that was ejected. Now it's just starting to swirl around and mix in the atmosphere. There's been no new additions. There's been a lot of volcanic eruptions, but nothing's really gotten that high, so it still is the ash by itself at those altitudes. So I encourage you to look at the 2022 view compared to 2018 on the bottom, and how much more particulate is visible in Null School. They can try to remove the data, but there's other things you can go around and find nuggets if you really look for it. This is one of the most telling here because that before and after view is startling. And again, we'll focus in on that blue box is the eruption at Tonga. So you would just assume and think anything 10 degrees up or 10 degrees down would be instantly blocked out. And that would be the crop reduction zone, for a better term for it. So then I start to find this kind of data here, watts per meter squared on total solar irradiance. If you know anything about solar panels, that's how they measure where you can put solar panels that will produce enough power or not. Watts per meter squared. How much energy is coming out of the sun and striking a square meter on the surface of our planet? Well, this is the most interesting chart that I found out of all the research in the last couple months, because they pinged it down so cleanly on how much decline there is in sunlight actually hitting the surface of the planet. But again, March 1st, it ends the data. Why is it not June 1st, July 1st, August 1st, September 1st? That's scary. That's just literally civilization-ending data that they understand. Somebody has it, but it's not outbound. Where you can see is 1.8, and it'll drop down to 2 watts per meter squared, decline that fast. That black line straight through the center there is 2 watts per meter squared, instantly gone. And as we see the spread, I'll bring it out anywhere from, say, half of a watt per meter squared all the way to 1. So keep this in mind as we go through these next charts here. We're going to remove 1 watts per meter squared, or I'll even say 2 at some of the observations here. But you can also see where it is, 20 degrees south latitude, and that's going to continue to spread and spread and spread. And we looked at the length of the spread through NIWA some month after, and it continued to just waft through the atmosphere. So this watts per meter squared, the Maunder minimum is one of the best ones, the grand solar minimum. And then we got the Dalton minimum, and we are now into what's called the Eddy minimum. So the person who discovers the solar declines on these 400-year cycles, 200-year cycle, 2,000-year cycles, gets to name it. So if we go back to the Maunder minimum, we have some drop-offs of total solar irradiance of, not even 2 watts per meter squared. So really, what is it that was causing the Earth's temperatures to cool and crops to be lost, famines, 25% of global population decline? Food. The amount of ash in the atmosphere with the same volcanic eruptions in the 400 years ago in the 1600s also had an effect on food growth, crop production. Again, if you come to the Dalton minimum, we have another very steep drop-off of 2 watts per meter squared, 1.5. Now, there were a couple of eruptions during the Dalton minimum that were measurable in the glacial ice sheets on the GISP2 ice core data sets. Once that ash falls on the ice and the snow comes on top, it gets compressed and it's a dark line. Now, the thickness of the dark line is obviously the size of the eruption, how much ash was gone out. So they had Tambora, year without a summer, 1815. Following subsequent 1816 was technically the year without summer. And there was also an eruption in 1810 that they found that was a little 75% less than Tambora. But those 2 ash layers are just very close to each other in the glacial ice sheets. Now, this is the average. Now, in the yearly totals, you can see sometimes there's a dropout of, say, 1 to 1.5 degrees watts per meter squared, but it pops right back up. So this longer-term average shows you approximately how it flows. So to lose 2 watts per meter squared in a single event, when you're looking at this type of undulation of slow declines, takes it way outside the 2 standard deviations. We're talking like a 6 sigma event of collapse instantly of how much sunlight is reaching the planet's surface. And it's like this. Sunlight means crops. The visible light that we see, Roy G. Biv, and those lenses and Pink Floyd, the wall, and that sort of thing that you see the different colors coming out, the sun is sending down its energy. Those different wavelengths, plants absorb at different rates. So if anybody understands greenhouses or how things grow in greenhouses, before they were programmable and you could change the nanometer wavelengths yourself, we can now. But before you could not. So your target species of plant, you bought the specific LED grow lights just for that plant. Whether it would be in the blue wavelength or coming up toward the reds, you bought the specific tuned nanometer wavelength for the plant. So whether you wanted to grow lettuce, all right, you're going to tune it in. If you're going to grow hemp, you're going to tune it in. If you're going to grow any types of Gynora high value superfoods, you would tune that in. Every crop has its target where it absorbs the most out of that spectral irradiance. And of course, they're going to get the peripheries on it, but there's a target nanometer in there that is the most absorption of that species that brings in the light to do the photosynthesis, generate the chlorophyll, and do all these things with respiration that plants need to grow. Sunlight diminished is sunlight diminished. So the hardest thing for me to find right now is studies on crops that they've run through and decreased total solar irradiance on a field crop like soy, wheat, or corn in a setting like this, where days, weeks, and months they just turn and tweak the different watts per meter squared, how much irradiance is reaching the crop, and then doing that research on if you turn it, if it's 2 watts per meter squared decline, well then what's your percentage loss in a soybean field, or a wheat field, or a corn field? You know, that information I'm still trying to round up, and I've been looking for it for months. It's very difficult to find those types of studies. Again, we're all in it together. If anybody knows this information or has links, please share. So remember that chart I showed you, we're losing 1 to 2 watts per meter squared. This is horizontal irradiation or another radiation map on how much radiation is striking these crop growing zones in South America and South Africa here, for example. Your bars right there are showing you the daily totals of how much watts per meter squared is striking the planet's surface there. If we're going to remove one out of that, every color on this map goes dimmer in both continents, on all the continents. You take down the solar irradiance, they all step into a different band. So, for example, in South Africa, if you're with me, let's look around, say, Cape Town. That's pretty much rated at 5 watts per meter squared. If that declines even 1, it's going down into the 4s, which turns it green. If it's down 2, it turns into something that would be blue. You can do this even with the super hot reds. If it's going from a 6 down to a 5 or a 4.5, that takes it from hot red down into yellow or green. This is the amount of sunlight being lost right now. So can you expect our Southern Hemisphere crops to produce, even if they have the fertilizers and the seeds and the herbicides and the pesticides, which they don't, because there's a global shortage of that. Supply chains are broken. Nothing's coming out of Europe. It is a full bankruptcy and liquidation of Europe as we speak. So think about that. How much crop can we really grow even under optimal conditions if we had all the inputs, if the amount of sunlight striking that crop grow zone is diminished down into almost a new climatic zone? This is the shift that is currently happening. It's not talked about on the media, but that drip feed into the largest water vapor emission from Tonga would be something that would bring us into that sort of, how do we say, realization. For the scientists, they get it. Excuse me, I'm going to go back to this one before we get on the break here. The scientists get it. The world governments totally understand what's happening. International agriculture and grain traders, those on the side of dairy, they get it. So cattlemen, dairymen, dairy industry, dairy folks, thank you for joining. This is for you as well, so you can see the damage that is happening to the crops in the Southern Hemisphere. Where do we get it from is the point. If this is going offline and the Ukraine's offline and America just got a decline, they're down in the 160s now of bushels per acre, down from 190 on the original estimates. We're down 169 or so, and it's going to continue lower. Mississippi River's bottlenecked until April, until we get more melt waters coming in there. So as you look around the planet, grains are getting more and more difficult to obtain. So where is the grain going to come from? And you go, it's not really. There's not going to be any way that the Southern Hemisphere can grow an enormous amount of grains. On conservative estimate, and this is a no BS conservative assessment, they're going to lose 50% of production in the Southern Hemisphere this year. And then I'll come to it just after the break here. Ukraine's agriculture minister said they're not going to plant any winter wheat this year. So where are the crops going to come from? They're not. The wild card is, when does the populace of the planet wake up to that fact? And how are our governments positioned to quell the anger? Because people are going to be so incredibly angry that they were not warned when they could have gotten together. The violence, governments are going to respond to that violence by putting in more measures for more control. Your digital rationing card will be issued end of the year. These changes are so fast and inbound. Now, how do you distract away from it? And then you look at the global news today, and it makes total sense. When I look at these stories out there, I'm like, those are insane. Oh, no, they're distractions to distract away from this event happening in the Southern Hemisphere. So if you start to look at it in a different perspective, and you just kind of tweak it a little bit, go, this is the main event here, the crop loss of Southern Hemisphere, Northern Hemisphere. Grand solar minimum, you're going to lose percentage of the population anyway. This is the main event. So how do you distract away from it until it's the proper time to not and let everybody get on the same bandwagon that there's a global famine inbound, and then use that fear and the stimulus and move the global population? We'll be right back after the break.